as time went on and we did our research on Bitcoin, and the first paper we wrote was in 2015, and it was in collaboration with Art Laffer. And so I said, Art, I want you to take this paper, Can Bitcoin Serve the Three Roles of Money? And I want you to tear it apart. Now, Art is known for his fiscal policy expertise, but his mentor was Robert Mundell, who won a Nobel Prize for his monetary theory. And he was very involved in bringing the euro together. So I don't know how people feel about that these days, but nonetheless.
I'm glad we're not part of it.
Yes, there you go. So then, so Art did rip it apart, and which was fantastic. And he came back to us and he said, I've been looking for this ever since we went off the gold exchange standard. He said, it's a rules-based monetary policy, rules-based monetary system. And I said, and he said, I may not agree with the rule, because he was thinking more in terms of inflation. So you'd want a price rule as opposed to store of value, which quantity. He says, but it's okay. It's a rule, and we need to get back to this. And I said to him, Art, how big could this be? And he said, well, how big is the U.S. monetary base? Now, Bitcoin was $250 at that time. So it was roughly a $6 billion network value or market cap. And I said, he said, how's the monetary base? I said, it's $4.5 trillion. He said, there's your answer. I said, really? And I immediately, I put a lot of money, especially our analyst, Chris Berniski at the time.
I know Chris.
You know Chris.
Yeah.
So our analyst, he was the one really doing the work on the paper, and hand selected Yassine, which has made us very happy. But he, your question again, I lost that.
What was your moment where you realized, which you've explained?
So I put, I don't think I've ever disclosed this before, but I put $100,000 in.
$250.
Yeah.
I don't know how many Bitcoin that is. What's that, 400 Bitcoin?
I don't even know. And I wasn't counting at the time, but, and I've kept it all, but because as soon as he said that, the light bulb went on. You did that personally or with the fund? Couldn't do it with the fund because we had to find a security. And so this thing called GBTC, which everybody knows now is Grayscale, Bitcoin Investment Trust, that had the 1 year holding period, and they were just cycling through that. Sorry, this is the rules of your fund, means you can't buy ETFs directly. Can only own securities. Yes. And so we had to find one. And we found Grayscale. Actually, Grayscale was one block away from us in Chelsea. Nice. And so they opened their books, and we had to go to the New York Stock Exchange. I mean, we had to do so much to get Bitcoin in. So we put it in ARKW, our next generation internet fund first, and then we put it into ARKK, which is the flagship fund. But and Chris, when he saw me do that, all of a sudden he felt so much more responsible. You know, he did anyway, but 100,000 is like, okay, she just did that, and she did it off my research and so forth. So it was, he doubled down as well. So, I mean, it's a great story because, well, it ended well, right? You can still only invest in securities. In ETFs, yes. ETFs, yeah. And so therefore you've invested in companies as well as the Grayscale Trust. How do you feel about the performance of the Grayscale Trust? And do you basically see it as a fire sale? I do see it as a fire sale. I do ultimately think maybe it's going to take a new administration, but we'll get an SEC commissioner in there who... Hester Peirce. Oh, yes. We know Hester, and we're definitely aligned. I don't know. She would be very controversial. I'd love it. But, we would love that. Yeah, I know. So, but... You know, just as you were saying, the UK, there is going to be regulatory arbitrage, and, you know, the US risks, we're already seeing it happen in business moving offshore because of our regulatory system. And a different administration, and I would say, you know, an administration that really cares about, you know, making sure innovation is very welcome here from a regulatory point of view, I think will grant grayscale conversion to a Bitcoin ETF, and then that gap closes, and that's a nice day. Yeah.
And what is it like as an investment? Because it is particularly weird. Bitcoin. It isn't a company, and while some people refer to it as a commodity, it's a particularly weird commodity because it's so controversial. Mm-hmm. Some people have this kind of weird hate towards it, even though they don't understand it. It gets constantly attacked by the media. Yeah. It is politically divisive, though we are seeing that gap close. We are seeing some people more from, let's say, the Democrat side come along. Ro Khanna and Senator Gillibrand have all kind of expressed an interest in Bitcoin, which is great because we don't want it to be a partisan issue. But like you as an investor, it must be a particularly weird commodity to be invested in and to try and explain to people.
It isn't hard for me to explain.
Okay.
I mean, when you have conviction in something as a necessary innovation to help solve some of the world's problems, and I've had my background is both economics and finance, so I feel very confident in what I'm saying. This is the first global, private, meaning no government oversight, digital, rules-based monetary system. When I'm explaining it like that, I ask everyone to listen to each of those words. Each one of them is very important. And this is one of the most profound innovations of our time. So my conviction, and it's born out of our research, it's born out of great research that Yassine, Frank, and David are doing now, as well as what Chris has done, and the community largely. So there's no doubt in my mind. And, many people think that I'm too confident in not just with Bitcoin, but all of our strategies. We face the same kind of pushback with all of our innovation strategies. This is nothing new. This feels the same. It's a little different to explain, but it's not a company, so more finance, but it's a monetary system, which is economics, and I'm comfortable in both of those zones.
Do you see a growing interest again in Bitcoin right now? Are people talking to you a bit more about it just because of what's happening in the economic environment?
We get questions all the time. I think people love to hear our take on, excuse me, but crypto broadly.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
So, but what we talk about is, in the way I just described Bitcoin, that's the money revolution. And then we have the financial services revolution, DeFi, a little more centralized, and then we have the next generation internet revolution around digital property rights. And I realize all of these involve property rights, but when you're talking about the creator economy and the blending of consumption and investment, it's probably even more centralized and in that third bucket. I think when people hear us describe this new world, especially young people, it hits a responsive chord. And the young people are bringing their parents into it. So that's an interesting dynamic. That really hasn't happened in my career before.
Right.
Yes. And they're bringing Ark to their parents as well.